everybody. Thank you for joining the Vantage Point once again. We are so excited to bring you a very lively discussion today. God created sex. The world has perverted it, and the church has a right to change the narrative on it. So we want to talk about it as Christian women, but also just from the standpoint of how, first of all, first segment, how do you talk to your kids about sex? All of us have had children now that are older. I have the youngest one, my surprise child, who's 8. And so I assume we've had to mention or have conversations. Guys, how do you talk to your children about sex?
I was just straight up. This is what, yeah.
Jenny said it.
Yeah, I just, because I feel like the world, they'll hear about it at school. And I wanted to make sure that they could combat the information they were hearing with facts, right? Because at school, they tell you all kinds of things about, our kids were exposed to so much at school. So I didn't, if you're given, if you were presented with something that, that's not right, and talked about, that kind of thing and what it's for. So I feel like if you're honest with your kids about when is it okay, and then you come back and the changes that go through their bodies and, all of that kind of stuff. So I was just honest with them.
So my experience is a little different. Monsters, right? But it was a play on the horns. But when I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, what did you talk about today in class? And then she was humming the wind up to a very old school popular R&B song. And I said, where did you get that from? Well, she said, today this is what the teacher played when we started this lesson. So I was kind of forced into the conversation. I don't know that I was really ready to do that. And I think sometimes we either repeat how our parents taught us or did not teach us, or we go overboard. Well, my parents didn't tell me this, so now I'm going to make sure you know. So for me, we just had to sit down and talk about, first of all, why are we talking about hormones in 6th grade? And I guess that might be natural for some, but for me, it's not. It's not often that the church world talks about sex. Unless we're saying no, you don't do it, And so for me, we started because of something that happened at school.
Well, I kind of was forced into the conversation too, more so like, yeah, this happened. And I was like, what were you going to tell me? So, because I was going around like, no, I talked to my child about this. He knows not to do it. Oh, well, people that know me now know who it is. And then one day while he was in school, I just asked him, I was like, are you still a virgin? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, when were you going to tell me? He was like, I didn't think it was any of your business. Because he's in college at this point. But I think I always tried to avoid it for some reason. It was just like, because I thought I knew that he wasn't. Because I took you to school. I picked you up from school. A
lot happens in school.
A lot happens. People skip school. That's what I found out. There was some skipping of his classes. But I am definitely more hands-on with my daughter about it more. I think I was just uncomfortable trying to talk to my son about it. But I just always assumed, how could he? He's with me all the time. That was a lie. I found a way.
Well, and I get it because I have 2 sons that are older than my daughters. So I have one in college and one who's graduating next year. And so talking to my sons, even though my husband could, he's a little more quiet on the topic than I am. And so,
why do you think you're so vocal about it?
Well, because prior to being a youth pastor, and we'll probably get into this later, though, I've had to deal with a lot of young people who have a lot of different sexual encounters in their history, and not just normal stuff, like just sexual issues are big.
Right.
So I don't want to have my kids, I never wanted to share things with other people's kids that I didn't share with mine.
Right.
And so because I know this comes about, I remember when my oldest son first, I knew he liked a girl. I could tell in his countenance. I heard him talking from 2 rooms away, and I thought,
radar.
it has happened. And I did. I was like, okay. So, you know, when we're watching stuff on TV or something and they would kiss, I would be like, oh, yeah, they're kissing. Yeah, you shouldn't do that. You don't see the STD she just got. You don't understand what's burning. What's itching. Like, I was just go like, and it was age appropriate because I can't say I did that when they were like 7, 8, but as they got to be teenagers.
Oh, yeah.
And things started to come up, I want you to know this ain't no love scene. I need you to understand he just had a baby and he don't even like her next
Right.
week. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I tried to, and yes, my kids pretty much died inside a few times.
Yeah.
With the words mommy would say that I'm not going to stay on TV. But I tried to be very, very out there with it because I didn't want them to be ashamed. And I don't know, how do you guys determine what's age appropriate?
You know, I went to my son's school. He was performing with some choir or something. And when he walked across the stage, all of these girls just started screaming. So I stood up. What's happening right now? They're like, oh my God, that's his mom. But they screamed like a celebrity walked into, and it's time. And this was like 7th grade. Oh, it's time. Because I don't know.
Couldn't love Avery though.
I mean, he's adorable. But however, it was like 20 of them. And that's not okay, right? Because again, your head starts getting big, and I feel like anytime, you know, somebody can come in and start making you feel a different way about yourself, you need to start having some conversations about, you know, just life. And you guys know my husband. He's going to talk to him for 5 hours. I'm just going to say it and walk away. But he's going to try to understand the way they process information. And so to me, it was whatever you could learn in school. And when I realized school had gotten so out of control, it was so different than when I was in school, that there was just no limits, because there was no limits there to what they would even see or what they would even hear. So I couldn't have any limits. So
I think media forces us in a lot of ways to have to address some topics. You know, you can be watching a wholesome TV show and this weird commercial comes on. The commercial is about cologne, but the commercial shows a lot more than cologne. It accentuates more than cologne is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely.
And so I try to watch. When they were younger especially. And again, I think different backgrounds produce different parenting styles, you know?
Yes.
I would say if the parent has experienced any type of trauma or negative sexual experience or any type of trauma related to that area, I think you train your children differently, you know? And I think whether we realize it or not, that's starting the conversation towards sex. You know, there's a certain way I taught my girls, if you're gonna hug a guy, how you hug them.
Right.
You know, I think they call it the church side hug.
Oh, just call your hug,
You know, you teach them things like that. And sometimes we don't realize that doing that, we're sending a message as to, okay, why do I gotta hug them like that? Well, because, don't know if we should say it on TV, you have a chest and it's not made for you to hug and push up on everybody. Well, in their mind, there's innocence there. Right. Most of the time, they don't know that. But now we've just introduced this idea of why I can't hug them. And then, you all have daughters. I can remember when they started to grow and develop and they knew that they arrived. You know, that was a different conversation because then the girls start walking funny, you know, you're going to tip over if you keep walking like that. But I think whether we admit it or not, I think we start this conversation way before we sit down and, quote, talk about the birds and the bees.
Oh, yeah.
I totally agree. One more thing, and I love what you said, media does force us to talk to our children about everything because we are Christians and we believe the Bible from the beginning to the amen to the end. And we believe that sex should be between a male and a female. And then nowadays, it's like if you touch on it, oh, well, you trying to say that this is not right. I'm saying what the Word of God says, what we stand on, what we believe. So media does force us to touch on so many things that I didn't know about until my 20s. They're knowing now, maybe, and that is because of social media. They're knowing about around 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. And it's scary because everybody's offended. You can't say anything because I'm going to offend you. But you're offending me because you want me to go against my views, you know?
I think that, you know, the church can't be quiet on this, and the parents can't be quiet.
That's right.
Or afraid. I'm not going to be intimidated because you don't view it the way I do.
Right.
And because you don't view it the way I do, I have to be quiet? No,
Right.
not happening.
Not happening, not now.
Well, you can view it any kind of way you want in your own house, right? In your own house, you can see whatever you want to say. But
Yes.
my house, this is how we're going to operate. So,
Well, and I think sometimes it's not even about not viewing it the same. It's just awkward.
yeah, it is. It is awkward.
It is awkward. I mean, it's a normal thing, you know, having boys who are teenagers. You know, a few years ago, I started having the conversation. I'm like, you might wake up and feel a certain way and notice X, Y, Z. And by the time I got done with that, they were like, I'm not even bashful, in case you missed that, but I wanted to die too. But I did not see that I was passing out as hard as they were. You know, when they left the room like, Mom, I was like, oh, thank God. You know, that conversation's over. But I think that, you know, we have to take the narrative back. I'm tired of the things that God has given to be a blessing being contaminated because of we follow the narrative of the world. I truly feel like the world just can't be the only people talking.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
So it's
That's
really
why I'm
important.
grateful for the vantage point.
Yes,
Because we're going to talk about it.
And so we're encouraging you, you know, find your own way to talk to your children about what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're feeling, what they will feel. And yes, do it age appropriately. But talking about sex is important. And just know you're not in it by yourself. Pass out when you leave the room. But do let them know what God is saying about it. The way he created them is okay, as long as it's according to the Bible. And we'll be back to finish this important conversation in just a moment. Thank you for joining us with Vantage Point. Stay tuned.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move. So I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
If you love them enough to crawl into a play place to get them to come down, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Welcome back to the Vantage Point. We're here to continue our conversation. We're going to talk about sex and how it's presented in the church. I think this is important. Like, you know, I am a youth pastor, and so dealing with young people, about every youth group I've had, a third to 50% have had a experience with molestation, pornography, masturbation, or some kind of sex before 18. So what I'm asking, though, today of this panel, in talking about sex as a church, because we cannot afford to be quiet on it when this whole experience is sweltering under the radar, but they're not old enough to talk about it yet, so don't say anything. That doesn't make any sense. But as a church, usually all you hear about sex is don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Is that narrative working? And if not, what do we need to change?
I would say no. It's not working. It didn't work 30 years ago when they were telling us not to do it. So,
Speak for yourself, Jenny.
But I know, right? I was only whatever. But I think that, you know, my parents didn't talk to us about sex at all.
Mine either.
So again, my first entanglement Is that a word, right?
Smith made it one.
All right. Was in the church, and because I didn't know a lot. And but it was almost like, you know, human nature when you tell them, like, don't touch the wet paint. I'm touching that paint.
Yeah.
You know?
Good example.
Why am I don't even know if I want to touch the paint, but I'm touching it because you said don't touch it.
Right.
And I think that the no without explanation is that we sometimes miss, is the no, and then there's no explanation for the no. And sometimes the no is just no, but sometimes there is other information that's required. And understanding what the consequences are, not just the pleasures of it, but what are the consequences? Because to me, the consequences far outweigh the 2 minutes that it was good, right? So, or when you was a kid, it was 30 seconds, but it far outweighs that. Because the consequences can be 18 years, right? Yes.
Or longer.
Yeah, or longer. Right. So I just feel like the no without explanation, given especially where we are today with media and the things we've already talked about, there's no such thing as a no without explanation.
I want to just talk about that a little bit. So sex was presented to me in a perverted way because I was molested at 7 years old. So my view on love or what is acceptable was contaminated before I had a choice, right? So we have to also remember that we have children who are growing up in those type of environments, and you saying, don't do it, but now you've turned on something in me. Something in me has been turned on. So it's even harder, and I'm not making an excuse, you know, but now something has, an appetite that should have only been awakened in marriage is now opened up. And now I'm here caught out in a world of, you know, well, he said he loves me, he touches me this way, this awakens something in my body, you know, and now you're telling me, don't do it. God has something better. Okay, then why is this awakened in me then? You know, so there's so many things that are presented to the church, or, you know, that we have to, I mean, that's a really big thing. You know, I know I've had people to tell me that they watch porn like a regular TV show in their houses, you know, but then they come and they're introduced to God's way, but then you tell me, don't do it. But this is what my world really is.
I think the church has to overcome some stigmas that, not just on the topic of sex, but being willing to talk about what is happening or what's going on, and not, you know, sometimes I say, oh, you just sweep it under the rug and you keep going. I think that has done a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Because again, part of, and I don't know if our age group is starting to do it or if our children will do it in more detail, but I see a little bit more transparency in some cases.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we might not share all of our faults with our children, but there's some things I say, hey, you don't want to go this road. And I feel comfortable saying, this was my experience when I went down this road. Yeah. And a lot of us, when it comes to having some type of molestation or some type of sexual trauma in our youth, the adults don't know how to talk about it, you know? And because the adults don't know how to talk about it, of course, we don't talk to our children about it. So I think the narrative and the stigma has to change from being, let's move on, you know, act like it didn't happen and that stuff goes away. Because I'm learning what I dealt with in my teens and 20s, I'm dealing with now if I didn't take care of it then, or if I didn't deal with it at that time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do we go from not talking about this stuff at all to starting the conversation? You know, because we're not going to, like Takoya said, my kids are a little bit older, but I know there's certain things I could ask them right now and they would be like, oh gosh, she's getting ready to go there. But we have to go there, you know? So to a parent who's like, I don't even know where to start, where do you start this conversation, particularly when it comes to the church?
Oh, well, okay.
Look, we all turned our heads to you.
You know what? I was blessed to have this sex talk with about 120 kids at once. And I think Jenny was in the room. Because like I said, youth pastor, and I was like, we're going to talk about sex. And I didn't do it in a funny manner. We made no jokes. Our room has a divider in it because it's a classroom. We opened the divider, but only halfway, so I could see the boys on one side, girls on the other. There were no questions allowed. We shut the door, and then I had panels on each side who addressed the guys' questions, girls' questions. But what I found was interesting is something you said, Crystal. I made sure I asked all the parents before I did that, and I told them they could have my notes. And I had slides, Bible scriptures, and I was not biting my tongue on any word. I'm like, no, your kids are dealing with masturbation. They're being told it's normal in school now.
Yep.
We can't say, oh, no, we're not going to say that word. No, trust me, they're
learning it.
Or they've done it.
Yeah.
And so, but what I found was no parent pulled their kid out. Half of them asked me for my notes, and some added age groups I wasn't including. I was starting with 6th grade. Someone was like, can I bring my 4th grader? Can I bring my... I was like, whoa. So I think parents, we do want to talk. I think we just have to, one, I think we'll put these notes on our website if you want to get them, or if you want to inbox me, I'll send them to you because I actually do still have them. But two, I think you just start. Like, you just start with where they are. Like I said about watching the TV shows. If you notice they're interested in them kissing or they're watching you kiss, okay, well, what do you think about that? You know?
Right.
If you notice, like, they like my daughter's like, I like my clothes tight. What's your age? Why do you like your clothes tight? What do you think about? You know, like you said, the talk starts long before you talk about the actual act. And so, but if you're already there, I would say you're going to have to, it's going to be awkward for you, but never let them see you sweat.
Yep.
Never.
Never.
Just go for it and freak out when they leave the room. And so, because you can't assume. I think Jenny hit that really hard. Well, she mentioned it. They assumed, at church you just assume they know. They've heard it. I don't know, guys. Have y'all...
I heard the wrong thing. I heard it. I heard it. And again, I think we have to understand that when we talk to our children or when we talk to our other, the young people that we mentor or even other adult women, we're not talking from a place of curiosity. We're talking about from a place of prevention and you being saved. Right. I'm not going to tell you sex is wrong because it's not. It's only wrong if you're doing it outside of marriage, But I think we have to be, like we said earlier, you got to be bold about it, And listen, I know you're going to go to school and you're going to hear this, but that is the school rule, not the Bible rule. Right. You're being raised to follow the Word of God. And there's going to be some challenges to that. And I don't like when we make everything spiritual. A girl's going to get her period. That is not spiritual, It may affect you, but it's not spiritual, Those are moments to sit down and have that mom-daughter moment. Well, sweetie, life is changing, and this is not, oh, no, you need to pray more, you need to fast more. That's not
and I think our
the
response
answer
to things that come up is important because your kids will decide whether they can trust you based on what's happened around you, right? I remember when my oldest started her cycle, I'm calling everybody. Who does that? You call everybody and you tell your sisters, and I'm telling my mom. So when it was my youngest daughter's turn, she'd done it for 2 months and I didn't even know. And she's like, oh, you was not calling everybody. You was telling them all my business. So I think it is so important, one, that your response is one that they can handle, right? Because if you freak out or you do whatever, because I did. I don't know why I was so excited. It was like the worst thing ever, but I don't know. But the youngest was like, oh, she's not telling my business. And so again, kids decide based on your relationship with them whether they can trust you or not, right? And can I trust you with this conversation? And I think building a foundation, one thing my husband, when we got married, of course I had 3 kids and he didn't have any, was you can talk to me about anything. You know what I mean? I don't care what it is. You can always talk to me about anything. And they would. They wouldn't talk to me about anything, but they would talk to him about anything. Because his response to whatever even if he was internally freaking out about whatever they were saying to him, they didn't know. And they just felt safe. And I think it's important because of something so uncomfortable to feel safe.
Right.
Right? So it shouldn't be, you got to just talk to me. You should be able to go talk to your youth pastor. You should be able to go talk to your pastor. And when parents, put those parameters on their kids, they box them in and then they're talking to nobody. Right?
I'm so glad you said that because that's reminded me of something one of my children said to me. They said, I couldn't tell you. And that hurt me worse than what they actually did because they felt like they couldn't tell me.
Yep.
I think one thing I learned this year or a few years ago is that when you take your children to the doctor now, I believe it's age 15, they can ask you to leave the room.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that. And so the doctor asked my daughter, would you like her to leave the room?
She shouldn't have brought me.
Well, my mom said was, I can pay the bill, but I can't be in the room with you.
Right.
So anyway, I think we have to have these conversations because we're not always going to be in the room when these things are being talked about.
Right.
And I agree. And I just want to say to the people out there who are not children or don't have children, and you're like, it's too late for somebody to have this conversation with me, but you've been affected by things that pertain to sex or whatever. Remember, you have a dad to talk to too. You have a father to talk to too. So while you are a parent, be a parent. But remember, you do have a father to talk to too. And so you can tell them about anything. But I also like that the Bible says, the older women teach the younger women and the older men teach the younger men. There's some things you go to somebody who's trusted and safe and just ask them. Because you'll find what's happening to you, just like we don't want our children to feel abnormal. Just like we don't want our children to feel abnormal, we don't want you to feel abnormal. And we hope to see you next week on The Vantage Point, 11:30. Be blessed.